just come to do some work on this SL today, and luckily noticed that we have another passenger. Imagine putting your hand on that handbrake and driving off. I'm going to do a very short video today on this little part here, which is the ignition ring escutcheon, or however you pronounce that word. And this is common to many Mercedes. This is a 280 SL here, the red car, but it's common to the 123 and I think maybe even the Pagoda. But I will put the part number in and you can cross-reference it if ever you need it. Now this should come as a polished aluminium or chrome ring with a rubber section on the back, and there should be 3 tabs on there. One of these has broken off. What happens is you bend these to remove it when you're redoing the dashboard, they tend to snap off. The problem we've had with this particular car is this keeps ending up in the front footwell of the car, and what I'm going to show you is just how to put it back on and why that problem occurred in the first place. I'm sure I'll be the only person in the entire world to have this problem, but you never know. So yes, you've guessed it. To put this part in correctly, you have to take the instrument cluster out. Because you can't bend those tabs up from the outside. You could be sort of unprofessional and just glue it on there, but you wouldn't really want to do that. What happens is that slides in, these tabs should be straight when it slides in, and then you need to put your hand around here and just bend them to secure that. Now the reason this kept falling out is which also explains another slight problem that I had, is ever since I redid the steering on this car, I've noticed a slight vibration through the steering wheel. And the other day, for some reason, I had cause to move the steering wheel up and down. And what I realized is that rather foolishly, I don't think I ever tightened this nut and this nut up properly. And that is why you can see that the steering wheel moves. And the reason that escutcheon keeps falling down is that the ignition barrel is obviously attached to the steering wheel. So I've got to take that instrument cluster out to check something out anyway. Incidentally, a very common reason for getting water in your front footwells is you get water leaking through there, and instead of draining out the bottom of the car, what happens over time is you get these sections here become rusty, and they get little holes in them, and you start getting water dripping on your footwell and fuse box, and all sorts of terrible things start happening. Now this car has had some work on it, but obviously the front bulkhead and all the rest of it has never been completely repaired. It's not actually as bad as it could be, not perfect, but not by far not the worst I've seen. So it's worth, if you do take your instrument cluster out, just to have a look, not just down there, but if you can also see on the other side of this car here, you can just catch a glimpse of the other one, just to check out how rusty it is and make sure there's no major holes in there. What we're also going to do while we're here is just get a bit of trim fix on the back of that and see if we can stick that sound deadening material back up. Another reason for taking the dash out is I just want to take this stalk off here. It's just held on by these 2 Phillips screws here because it's actually stopped clicking up in one direction, and it is a brand new indicator stalk. I've done a whole video on replacing this, but I just want to have a quick look at it and make sure that it hasn't developed a fault. So what's supposed to happen is when you put the indicator stalk down, this little piece of plastic comes out like so, and in one direction it'll spring in, and on the other direction, when you push it up, it should snap the indicator stalk up, which it is actually doing. So it's not that the fact that the stalk isn't working, that's not the problem. It could actually be that the steering mechanism itself is a little bit worn. We'll have a closer look at that. One of the other things that you can often causes that is if you don't put these screws all the way in, and this is not sitting absolutely flush, you'll find that that little plastic bit there does not come out as far as it needs to. Basically, the inside of that has got a ridge on it. I don't know if you can see that just there. and as you turn the steering wheel, that ridge hits this bit of plastic and knocks it in or out, knocks the indicator stalk back up. At least that's what's supposed to happen. The other reason that if your indicator stalk is actually working fine when you take it out, the other reason that it cannot click off is sometimes these screws, when they've been taken in and out, they don't go in all the way, and so therefore when you're screwing the screw through here, it's not actually clamping this tight, and I think that may be the situation here. So we may just need to re-tap the threads on there, on here, just to get that screw to go in all the way. So I've measured the thread on that screw and it's an M4 0.7, so I just screwed it into there, and actually there was a lot of resistance screwing it in there, so I'm imagining that the threads on here were indeed knackered. Whether or not we need to do the threads on the actual ignition barrel or steering rack, whatever it is another question. So that's definitely cleaned up those threads. Okay, this is quite tricky to re-drill these threads because it's basically, you're only going to get one chance to do it. If you get it wrong and you mess up that, it's going to be a bit of a disaster. So I'm doing this very, very carefully. That screw, top screw now, is going in very easily in and out without any binding at all, so I can be confident that when I tighten that screw up, I'm actually tightening it against the indicator stalk and not tightening it against some cross threads, which is what I think we had before. This should just push back in there without too much bother. I have loosened these off just so I've got some slight wiggle room to wiggle that in, and just a matter of tightening those two screws up now. Okay, we've got those two screws back in, and as they say in German, I am gespannt to see whether that actually fixes that problem. To get that gator on, it does help if you loosen up these two bolts here, just give you slightly more room to wiggle this back and forwards, but don't forget to tighten them back up once you've got the gator on. Now, the whole reason we took everything out to start off with is to put this bit back in. It should just slide in. You may, once again, before you put that on, it's worth keeping those bolts loose so you can move this around slightly if you need to. And once you've got that in, you should be able to just reach over with your hands like so, and then just bend those tabs down so that can't come out. One of the other reasons for taking this dash out was because every now and again our mileometer would not work properly, and usually if your mileometer stops working, it's because that white cog there is either missing, cracked, or something like that. Now there was some movement on ours, so I just put a dab of super glue on there, and hopefully that will cure that problem too, thus killing 3 birds with 1 stone: the ignition escutcheon, the mileometer, and the indicator stalk. Getting this back together is just the reverse of taking it apart. These 3 screws here are dead easy. This one here, you might have to wiggle about a bit because that long tube actually goes into one of these buttons here, and you might just have to wiggle and twist it about until everything lines up. And when you've tightened the screws, don't forget to click those wires back in. Got all of those tight. The next thing to do is we've got this random earth wire that someone's put on, so we're just going to put that on this little corner here first. At some stage I may just put a ring on there and a plug so I can unplug things if I ever need to, as opposed to having to undo a bolt. And it's just a matter of plugging this all back in. Just pushes in. There's nothing else holding this instrument gauge in other than force. Before I push it all the way in, I'm just going to start the car up and make sure that everything is tickety-boo. I've just reconnected the battery. I forgot to mention that if you are ever taking the instrument cluster out, it is a good idea to disconnect the battery first to just avoid shorting anything. I'm just going to start this car up, and this car's always started first time every time, but the first time you start it when cold, it just sounds like it's a little bit laboured, and I think there's a problem with the starter motor, so just have a listen to this. But in a future video we'll probably whip that starter motor out and have a look at it. The fact that the economy gauge is not sitting on 0 there, means we've got a small vacuum leak somewhere, which once again I've done a video on finding the vacuum leak, not yet on fixing it. Seems to be working as it should, so we can now push this all the way in. Just make sure when you do put it in, you don't clamp any of the wires. Next up, just going to pop the steering wheel on. It's always a good idea when you take the steering wheel off to actually mark it with a piece of marker pen. Put your wheel straight before you take it off, and then make sure it goes back on straight. And then we're just going to put this bolt in here, and we're just using a little drain oil, what are they called? Oil pan plug thing to get that out. You could also use a big Allen key, I guess. Put a bit of thread lock on there if you really wanted to, a bit of blue thread lock. We're not going to, because I suspect it will not be the last time we have the steering wheel off this car. The front rubber bit just clips on like so. And that is job done. Let's take this car for a little drive and see if the indicator problem is fixed and if the mileometer is working as it should. I think we have secured the indicator sticking on problem, because we now, that's definitely working that way. Well, we got 2 out of 3 problems sorted. The vibration through the steering wheel is gone by tightening those bolts up. The indicator is working as it should now. Unfortunately, we did not manage to fix the mileometer, so there may be some other issue there, which we'll have a look at some other stage. And the ignition escutcheon, however you pronounce that, is staying on. The kids have gone back to school here in England after lockdown, so I'm hoping we might be able to start getting some work done on that silver car. We've got an awful lot of welding to do, but for the moment we're just going to leave this video here. I've mentioned this before, but if you ever need to look up Mercedes part numbers, this website here, mb-tilecatalog.info, is an excellent place to look up part numbers for your SL and also get all the pictures. Now on this picture here, the escutcheon is part number 158. And you can see that that part number there is 12368908080. Now you can still get that from Mercedes, and it's £18 plus VAT, 18 plus VAT. Now here is an interesting thing. If you get over to the SL shop, you will see that they sell that part number for £113.62. I don't think that's a printing error either. I did check with them. So Mercedes is substantially cheaper for that part than the SL shop. However, you'll notice that the SL shop also sell this part under a slightly different part number, 11568908080. And as far as I can make out, they're both exactly the same thing, and that's only £11.25 plus the VAT. So decide for yourself whether to get it from Mercedes or whether to save a few pounds and get it from the SL shop if you ever need one. This is what we use to get the steering wheel off, and also we use these for the rear diff oil and the oil sump plug as well. Only £13, but it does come in handy. Throughout this restoration, we have had to cut many new threads, and normally we just use this cheap and cheerful Silverline tap and die set. It's actually not that cheap anymore. It's almost £40. For more specialised things, if you were doing stuff on the engine block, etc., you would probably buy a much better quality individual tap or die, so that you don't have so much chance of snapping one, because it's a real pain if you snap one of those in the engine block when you're trying to tap die holes